So, I've been intending to present a somewhat more serious topic than I usually discuss here, and after a good deal of overanalyzing how I should present it, I have concluded that I shouldn't warm into it with a long-winded, awkward joke, and I should simply express my thoughts as plainly as possible. So, what I want to talk about right now is the biggest mistake of my life. And I want to talk about it mostly because I sincerely want to discourage anyone I can from falling into a similar pitfall. If I could be the last person who makes all of the mistakes that I made forever, because I helped share knowledge of my mistakes with the world and encouraged future generations to preemptively avoid such things, then that could stop a lot of suffering in the future. And even if I just help one person, then it's more than worth it. I also want to talk about this because I think that honestly and able to truly understand someone, it helps to know what their biggest mistakes are, what their biggest regrets are, and how they've changed and responded to those issues. And so I want to give you the opportunity to sincerely understand who I am and where I've been at in my life leading up to this point. And yes, I'm going to examine all of this while allowing my hair to be naturally crazy. Also, overachievers can just read instead of listening to me say it all out loud, and they get some optional homework to see if they want to make anything useful out of my half-formed notes. Is it in focus? Is it in focus? There, it's in focus. All right. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Here's random bonus points if you're bored and you want to think about what some of the things that I'm thinking about. So, I'll jump right into it. This is something that I've spoken about many times, but I've never presented it quite like this before. Back in 2012, I caused myself what seems to be a permanent and horrifyingly painful injury by experimenting haphazardly with drugs. Now, I never thought I'd be one of those, hey kids, be careful and don't ruin your life with drugs sort of people, but then I managed to hurt myself in a way that no human has ever been hurt before, and so I kind of really want to address this topic. Now, most of the time that people hurt themselves with drugs, it's from taking drugs that they consciously know are damaging to the human body, such as heroin or meth or alcohol. In my case, however, I was taking something which has never once, to my knowledge, had a lasting negative effect physiologically on a person, and so the injury which I've sustained was due to unknowable contaminants in the compound. It was supposed to be DMT, and I'm sure it mostly was DMT, but DMT itself doesn't deserve any negative associations due to my injury, because this injury was caused by my own self-destructive recklessness and the fact that I didn't use a test kit to make sure that I was getting a pure product. So what's happened to me since then is that the contaminants in the substance traveled directly from my lungs up the carotid and to my brain, but somehow on the edge of my brain, around the sphenoid sinus and the circle of Willis and the back of the optic canal, the contaminants seem to have been filtered and prevented from entering the brain, or something like that, and a salty, burning tar-like residue has been stuck in that area, tormenting me ever since. I assume it has something to do with the blood-brain barrier, but I can't get any useful information or diagnosis about this from any hospitals or doctors that I've talked to, because none of them think it's their job to discover new things, only to regurgitate outputs based on inputs they're familiar with. I've given about $20,000 to my local hospitals trying to figure out anything useful, because I sincerely doubt it's even complicated, it's just new. But because it's new, not one of the 30 or so doctors I've spoken with in the past 7 years has really been willing to make an effort to help me. And that's a profound sickness on behalf of the medical industrial complex, because I've literally given them nearly everything I own, and they've just taken all my money and basically shrugged at me and told me that they don't care at all about this injury, neither in the context of how much it's ruining my life, nor in the scientific context of just documenting it as an anomaly. Needless to say, I'm very frustrated with the fact that everybody in my local hospitals is completely comfortable stealing from me and ignoring a horrifyingly painful and life-ruining injury. I find it to be criminally negligent and pathetic on their behalf. I mean, I literally have to force them to do anything, and they don't care about my well-being at all. But I don't want to start into that rant again. Obviously, I'm very frustrated with that entire process for what is a very good reason. Since it's very disappointingly incompetent. Anyways, Anyways, ever since the end of 2012, I've had this salty burning tar residue rotting at the edge of my brain. And needless to say, it's really holding me back. It's always there. It's not quite as bad when I wake up if I sleep well for a few hours, and then it kind of gets worse throughout the day. Also, a weird component is that it constantly kind of like builds up pressure and like these small gaseous emissions which like crackle and pop, kind of like really slow pop rocks from the center of my skull. And then the gas from that kind of like it crackles around and it works its way forward from the injury, and it kind of snaps out of the backs of the eye orbits. I can hear it, I can feel it just coming out of the cavities behind the eyes. Anyways, it's such a specific thing that I honestly think that the right person would have the answer pretty quickly, knowing how the blood diffuses on the edge of the brain and knowing what could possibly link to the back of the eye orbit like that. In any case, everything that I've done in the past 7 years has been done through the veil of this pain and with the temptation of suicide nearby, honestly. Now, weirdly, having this pain has actually helped me realize how much I value and love life. It has helped me realize that I'm willing to suffer terribly for the opportunity to encourage the philosophical, moral, and spiritual contemplation of others. Because I've just come to realize that that's very important to me. I didn't realize it back when I was younger. For the years leading up to this injury and for the first several years after, I was basically always ready to kill myself soon. Mostly because I felt that this world is kind of sick and corrupt and rigged, and I didn't really enjoy life or feel that I had a purpose. So it just seemed logical to die. And that's kind of how I was living my life. That's largely why I was irresponsible enough to take a pretty large amount of this substance without testing it in the first place. Now, a lot of people might try to hide something like this for the sake of social appearances and things of that nature, but honestly, when you have chronic pain, at least for me, it really makes it not matter very much what people may or may not assume about me. I've learned what I am in ways that very few people would ever be able to imagine, and nobody can take that from me. What matters a lot more is that I know that there are people out there right now who are really close to where I was at in my late teens and my early 20s. They're looking out at this world with all the waste, all the hatred, all the corruption, and they might not feel like it's worth it. They might feel like they would have to change the entire world in able for it to be something that they want to live in. And that's an insurmountable obstacle. That's not something they can do. And it's those people who I want to reach out to if I can. I want to let them know that there might be a little more to it all than what they're currently seeing. And I'm not going to tell someone who's where I was at, oh, don't worry, it'll get better eventually, because that's not the point, and it might not. It might not get better. You might never meet anyone who knows how to help you process the trauma that you've experienced. You might have to continue enduring terrible things that you can't relate to anybody else because they wouldn't be able to understand. But through the work of processing the pains of the world and yourself, you might learn new things about yourself. You might discover that there are a few things that you sincerely appreciate and that give life beauty. And you might find out one day that you have become the kind of person who can now support others in ways that you were never supported. And even though it still hurts you and you're still carrying your burden, you might realize that it's kind of a wonderful thing to be able to use your experiences for the good of others. Or you might learn completely different things than anything I suggested. Who am I to say what you may or may not learn? Whoever you happen to become, though, they deserve the kindness and the respect of the person you once were. Don't punish your future self just because you don't like where you're at right now. I can personally guarantee you that hurting yourself more isn't the solution. And in my case, where I didn't think that I was hurting myself, I didn't think that I was inventing a whole new injury that no human has ever experienced before, I did still know that I was being irresponsible and that I wasn't caring about possible consequences because I was borderline suicidal. Taking unnecessary risks is directly kin to hurting yourself, just with the possibility of not hurting yourself. and sometimes with the possibility of hurting yourself in a new way that nobody's ever hurt themselves before. Probably not, of course. Things that have never happened before are quite rare, and I really doubt anybody else will ever smoke so much of a contaminated substance that they will end up with a burning tarry salt on the nerve endings along the back of their optic canal that never leaves. I think most people would listen to their body saying, maybe we should take a break and do something else. I'm just particularly headstrong, especially when it comes to my body trying to give me good advice, especially back then. Anyways, I could go into more detail about my psychology at the time and what it meant to me to be suicidal and the traumas of my childhood which led me down a self-destructive path and things like that, but I don't want to go too far into those sorts of nuances right now and muddle the main points. Maybe I'll talk about them later. But for now, I just want to focus on the main points, which are basically, firstly, nobody else can really hurt you quite like you can. Even if things are painful, even if the world is unfair and cruel, you deserve to treat yourself with respect and appreciation, because if you don't, you might cause irreparable damage to yourself in any number of ways. And the second primary point being that you should respect drugs and test your drugs personally with a kit and don't just trust that you're getting pure products. I'm not going to tell you not to do any drugs. I'll definitely discourage you from doing drugs that only serve to turn people into gross little gremlins, like the ones that I mentioned before. But I know there are a lot of very beneficial substances out there which can help show people ideas and joy that they would never be able to imagine on their own. And those ones should be explored with respect and in healthy environments. So that's all I want to talk about for now, and I hope that this message manages to inspire a few people to take better care of themselves, even though it's a little bit obvious and most people have already heard about the dangers of haphazardly taking risks without regard to your own well-being. Regardless, given how badly I hurt myself in such a way that is constantly distracting me, constantly making it very difficult for me to focus on anything, especially studying and learning new things, which makes it more difficult to be around groups of people for any length of time, which just generally makes everything way more difficult than it ever needed to be. Due to that mistake, it just feels really important to me that if relaying my experience helps anyone else avoid putting themselves through such pain, then it's worth it. And maybe if more people were honest about examining the pitfalls of their lives, then maybe we could all collectively help to prevent every future generation from repeating the mistakes of the past, because the frequency with which we individually and culturally repeat mistakes in this world is something of a tragic circus of absurdity. So that's all I've got for now. Let me know if you have any questions, or if you know anybody who might have any ideas about the nature of the salty caustic residue burning the edge of my brain. I don't have much faith that I'll ever receive help from Western medicine with this, even though I don't particularly think it's complicated, just because the architecture of the medical industrial complex is so rigid nobody thinks it's their job to figure out anything new. Which really compounds how important it is to me that nobody else ever has to experience something like this again, if it can be avoided. Anyhow, as always, thank you for taking the time to listen to me speak, and I look forward to seeing anything you wish to say in the comment section.